everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this week's vlog, I have a brilliant marathon runner here. This is Steph Kessell, who you may know as Steph Davis. She is a 2:27 marathoner and an Olympian who came first British female in the Tokyo Olympics. She is also a running coach and part of the coaching team at Runna app, who I'm an ambassador for and in whose offices we are recording today. Thank you so much for joining us here today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. In London for a few days, which is fun, but
busy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. So Steph, I hear that you actually didn't start running marathons until relatively recently. Did you run as a kid at all? And if so, when was it that you realised that actually you were pretty good?
When I was younger, my parents were really good at taking us to loads of sports. So I did like hockey, tennis, dancing, and I just loved kind of being active and doing what my friends were doing. And then I moved to school for secondary school, and we had a school cross country, which was something I'd never done at primary school. And I really didn't want to embarrass myself. So I went for it, and actually wasn't like too bad. Obviously I was only comparing myself against people in the school, but I quite enjoyed it as well. Through that, I then asked my dad if he could take me down to like an athletics club. So we replaced that with, I can't remember which sport at the time I was doing, and went every Tuesday night to a club basically and did a track session or a road session. But it was just kind of once a week while I was still doing hockey. That was another sport I loved. So it wasn't like I was used to following like a training plan back then. It was just kind of doing it when I fancied, doing the races that the school put me forward for. I didn't really compete much for the club itself. But I think definitely then it's helped me get to where I am now, having a very sporty background, but I also think not having so much intensity with the running, it then allowed me to like grow into it and find it when the time was right.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme through a lot of people who take it very far. They don't necessarily specialise that early and find that having a variety of sports when they're younger means that they can really improve when they start to focus on one particular sport, in your case running.
Yeah.
When was it that you decided to actually focus on marathons?
So it wasn't until 2018 that I did my first marathon. When I was at university, I had, as I was saying, always at school done the hockey and the running, and I made a choice when I went to university to do the running. So that kind of introduced me more to different types of running sessions. I went to more sessions as part of that club, but was still doing a lot of stuff that I enjoyed in the gym, like going to spin classes and circuit and stuff. And then I moved to London, and like fast forward kind of a few years, I became part of a running club because one of my colleagues at work kind of convinced me it could be fun to come down to. And for a while I was just like a seasonal runner. I would do it in the summer, and then in the winter I'd be back in the gym. But I really enjoyed it, and then I met my now husband at Clapham Chasers, the running club in London, and he and some of his friends were entering into the Berlin Marathon ballot for 2018. So I was like, I may as well. I probably won't get a spot. Berlin's so competitive. But I'd say even at that point I wasn't like really excited about getting the spot. Like if it went either way, I would do it if I got a spot, not do it if I didn't, and be fine with that. But then I did get a spot, and it just so happened that a coach at Battersea Track, where I went to my once a week session, had seen me running and thought there was some potential, and he also was looking to have more female senior athletes in his group. So it just kind of was a bit of luck that we met at that time, where he then offered to help me through to get me to Berlin.
Amazing. So you got into Berlin, and then you got a coach for that training journey.
Yeah.
Was Berlin Marathon immediately a success, or did you kind of grow into your 2:27 time, for example?
Yeah, so I ran my first marathon in 2:41. So
okay.
I was, yeah.
You're not slow.
No, I was really happy with that. I think when I was going into it, I was aiming for around like 250 or just under 250. So to run 2:41 on the day was amazing, but I think part of being able to run that time was I was also so terrified of the marathon, and that, especially that last 10k, because everyone has said you'll hit a wall, it's so horrible. So I'd almost like was preparing myself for that moment, and it was really, really hard, but I managed to stay on pace and get to the end in a good time.
Not
for
just
first
get to the
marathon.
end.
Yeah.
I think we can all admit that that's quite an impressive time.
Yeah, I was really, really happy with that.
Obviously, you competed in the delayed 2020 Tokyo Olympics, but now you're injured, is that right? So you're not going to Paris this year?
Yeah, so I'm injured. I've actually had like quite a rocky couple of years with injuries, which means Paris, unfortunately for me, is just not possible. I was hoping to try and make the team and run Seville Marathon in February, but I picked up a stress response in my shin, quite a bad one. So the good thing is it wasn't a stress fracture, but you pretty much treat them the same and have to take the same amount of recovery time. So there's just no time for me to do a marathon now in the qualification window, basically.
Well, that's good that you're taking it seriously. Can you explain the difference between a stress response and a stress fracture?
Yeah, so I have mine in my shin, which is probably more of like a complex area because then you hear things like shin splints as well. So shin splints is when you've got basically a bit of irritation in the sheath just off the bone. And then a stress response is when you start to get bruising and damage to the bone, but the bone's not cracked.
Yeah.
And then a stress fracture is when you've got like a crack in the bone, and then a full-on fracture is when there's a big crack in the bone.
And if you don't treat a stress response, it can turn into a stress fracture.
Exactly, and if you don't treat shin splints, it could turn into a stress response. So it is really important when you have things like shin splints to like get advice from a physio, but deload for a bit, get off your feet and let it recover.
Do you have your sights set on 2028?
Yeah, I do. I definitely am not done with the sport and marathon running. I feel like I have something in me that knows I can go faster than I have done, and I don't feel like I can stop until I've done that.
I have no doubt that that is true. Do you find it frustrating trying to work to a 4-year cycle rather than with most sports and with racing, you can kind of just work to a 1-year cycle or even in individual race seasons, but 4 years is a long time.
Yeah, it is a long time, but there are opportunities to do some great races in between then, I think, especially for marathon running, because the marathon majors themselves are so big. And then you have other competitions that come along, like European champs, world champs, Commonwealth Games. So it does give you something else to aim for, which is good, but that's probably been my downfall in the last couple of years. Like after the Olympics, I then really wanted to make the Commonwealth team. So instead of taking the right amount of time to recover after one marathon or one injury, and was then kind of rushing to try and qualify for the next competition. So, because I want to do as much as I can, like I won't be marathon running forever. But I think if I was to look back on those last couple of years, it'd probably be sometimes just to slow down and then choose those key marathons or competitions that really, really matter to you.
Yeah.
Can't do everything.
So you have your stress response at the moment, you're taking time out. Do you have any advice for anyone who's maybe going through an injury or having to take some time out, how to cope with that psychologically?
Yeah, it's really hard, especially if it happens just before your goal race and you've been training for months for that, you've planned it maybe 6 months or a year ago and you really wanted to get there, and then it's completely out of your control, you just can't do anything about it. And I think for me, I've probably got better at coping with it the more injuries I've been through.
Practice.
Yeah, practice. I like to get a specific diagnosis on what I'm dealing with. For me, having a grey area and having pain or discomfort and not knowing what it is almost like the worst part, because you don't know what you can or can't do. So once I've got a diagnosis from a physio or a doctor, whoever you can work with, it then can help me plan the next stage and my recovery. And I'm a person that just likes a plan. So once I'm able to have that plan in place and know what I can or can't do, I'm generally fine. Obviously really sad like that I didn't get to my race. I might miss another opportunity like this time, potentially getting to the Olympics. But I can then just put my focus into that recovery. And I think it's just really focusing on then what you can do. And when you're injured, okay, with this one, I had to take 10 days of like doing completely nothing. I was just counting down those days that I knew that wasn't going to be permanent. And I just was thinking, I just want this injury to get better. So I think if you can plan and then implement non-impact stuff like cross-training. And I think a lot of runners are only used to running. So when it comes to that period of injury, they don't know how to cross-train, they don't want to cross-train, it's not running. Whereas if you can find another sport that you can enjoy, then it just makes that time of injury a lot easier.
Can you talk us through your cross-training and why it is that you do all of that?
Yeah, so I can't run the 160k, 100-mile weeks that a lot of elite marathon runners do, and I cannot do double run days either. It's just a no-go for me. So the way I supplement that is by adding non-impact forms of training, and I've experimented with swimming, elliptical trainer and the bike, and I actually tend to use like a bit of a mixture in my marathon builds or whatever I'm training for, just depending on sometimes the accessibility to one of those sports during my running training. I'm fortunate enough that I've got a turbo at home, so it's really convenient then just to jump on the bike rather than going to a gym. But I also find the pool, I really enjoy doing harder workouts in the pool. So we'll often add, on a Tuesday morning I'll do my track session, in the afternoon I'll get into the pool with a group, so that also helps to do some harder efforts. So I can have like a double hard day, but by having the second session offloading, you don't have the impact going through your bones, joints, ligaments, tendons, so it just protects them a little bit, but cardiovascularly you can still work really, really hard. And I don't think there's any sport that's probably better than the other, it's just depending how good you are at working hard at them. Like I wouldn't say like I'm a particularly talented swimmer, but I can swim well enough that I can then get the fitness benefits, whereas if you struggle with swimming, you're probably better at trying to use the bike or the elliptical trainer, where you can work hard, you can get your heart rate up.
Yeah, I am terrible at swimming and I hate it, so I would not be choosing
you
swimming.
would not be choosing swimming.
But then, you know, I really enjoy a peloton or, you know, doing something like that where you have the focus on, it takes the focus off just doing the exercise, you know, there's a bit of gamification of that. And
exactly, and I use Zwift on the turbo for that.
Right, exactly. So I think it's like you say, it's about finding something that you are not necessarily, well, preferably going to enjoy, but also that you can actually really push yourself on.
Yeah.
What about strength training?
So I do that twice a week, and I'd say like we're constantly fine-tuning my strength program, and I'm fortunate enough that like I have a physio who speaks to strength coach to make sure that I am then doing exercises that are specific to me and my weaknesses, and they're going to help my injuries. Because I think, I mean, if you're lucky and you don't get too injured, you can follow a more generic strength plan, but if you are injury prone, it's really making sure you're strengthening those areas that you know will help your injury.
Yeah, so my strength training program through the years has gone from being a generic one to essentially all the physio exercises I've ever been given.
You've ever accumulated.
Yeah, it takes quite a long time now.
Yeah, it does.
But it does mean that I'm injured a lot less now than I used to be, which is great. Speaking of coaching, you mentioned yourself that you have a coach, or several coaches, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm lucky that I've got a team behind me. I have my running coach, and then I have a strength coach, I have a physio, doctor, nutritionist, sports psychologist. Hopefully I haven't missed anyone out there.
That is a lot of people. So even coaches need coaches, which is great. But tell us about your coaching. When did you become a running coach, and what made you want to make that decision?
Yeah, so I became a running coach during lockdown. I was seeing kind of people struggling without gyms and not knowing how to keep fit. So I wanted to help people run safely within lockdown, because then when you're faced with only being able to do one sport, there is the temptation to do so much of it.
Sure.
And then you're going to get injured. So I started doing my own coaching then, and I've just kind of built that over the last few years. I was still working in finance when I first started that, so it's allowed me to kind of slowly transition out of working in finance. And then just over 2 years ago, I was approached by Runna to see if I wanted to come on board and be one of the coaches there. So yeah, now I'm really fortunate I can just do my coaching full time, and it's really nice to have that, my own work, my own flexibility that I can then do around my training. So yeah, I feel lucky that I have that set up.
No, that's amazing. That's a good transition. But you mentioned that you used to work full time in finance alongside trying to train for all of these races. Did you train for the Olympics whilst also working full time in finance?
No, so by that point I was down to part time.
Okay, so that's still impressive though.
So when I ran the Olympic qualifying time, when I ran 2:27 the first time, I was still working full time. And then after that, I cut down to part time because Olympic trials were meant to happen. Obviously COVID came, so that got postponed. But I really wanted to put everything into that trials. And I thought if I could just decrease my hours at work, then that would give me that chance. And you want to make the most of every opportunity you can.
Absolutely.
I was fortunate that my work was so supportive, and if I hadn't made the Olympics, they probably would have let me come back full time. And then I was also fortunate enough, I mean, I would never say COVID is a fortunate situation, but it did my experience of COVID, it gave me more time to train for the Olympics, to train for the Olympic trials, which were then a whole year later. So, because I didn't have all those other distractions around me. So, yeah, it was obviously a very weird and difficult time, COVID, but it did give me a lot more headspace just to focus on my running.
I think a lot of people experience the same. For a long time, though, you were running whilst doing full-time work. For anyone, and this is most people, of course, for anyone who's got a full-time job and maybe trying to balance their running around their work schedule, family life, social life, etc. How did you manage that, and do you have any words of advice for people?
Yeah, so I had to be like really disciplined, and I think the key thing for me was having consistency in my week. So Monday would always be an easy day. Tuesday evening I would always go to the track session, and that just meant I never committed to social things on a Tuesday. I was just, my diary was not available then. And I think it was just having that structure meant that I could know when I had my free time. I knew when I needed to do my training. It's difficult to balance. It makes life very busy. It makes things like sometimes like sleep. You don't get optimal sleep. But it just meant that I could get all the training that meant a lot to me done. And sometimes that means making sacrifices in other parts of your life, but my friends are so supportive, and okay, it was an adjustment with some people to be like, oh, she's declining this or prioritizing that over hanging out, but everyone I think has their own goals, and you just have to kind of respect what people need at that time. But you have to be really, really quite strict with yourself, and I think having a group that you commit to go to on a weekly or twice a weekly basis really helps hold you accountable and keep that structure in place. Did
you experience some backlash from maybe friends or family around not being able to, hang out?
Yeah, definitely. I think nothing really negative or anything. It was more just sometimes a vibe that maybe I was just being sensitive and it wasn't there. But I think sometimes more from like my family who are going to be more open with me would be like, do you really need to go on this run? But that was only in the early days. Like now they're super supportive, and it's more like when we're planning a day together or a trip together, they'll factor in my training too.
Yeah. No, that's great.
So
I mean, I think once you've been to the Olympics, no one can say that you don't take it seriously.
Yeah.
I know that you're a coach, you also run, so you've got both sides of the coin for this question, and this is something I got asked by my Instagram followers to ask to you. So do you find that your training gets affected by changes in hormones over your menstrual cycle, and if so, how do you work that to your advantage?
So I don't personally, before and during my menstrual cycle, my symptoms are relatively light. I say the only thing I struggle with is sleep. So sometimes I just won't sleep for 4 or 5 nights in a row. I'll be up and down. Like I will sleep, but like very, very broken sleep. And when you're training a lot, that's far from ideal. So I will kind of have to listen to my body in that sense and decide, make a call whether it's good to train or not. I do have athletes that I work with who have really quite bad symptoms, but the way we do it is just open communication. So instead of me also tracking their cycle and then planning their training around it, I just plan their training as normal, but they'll always come to me as soon as they feel X, Y, or Z. We'll speak about it and we'll adjust the training as we go, because it might fluctuate from month to month as well. So it's just really about having open communication. If you work with a coach or you don't work with a coach and you have to listen to your own body, it's just really listening to your body and not being afraid to adjust training. And I find the most common thing is the females that I coach are just tired or really bad cramps. If the cramps are super painful, they often just can't do anything. If they're really tired, then they'll often just be able to do something a bit easier, but we'll take out the intensity until they feel it's right. And I think people then worry, oh, but I've missed that session, I'm going to lose fitness. But if you push through that session, it could lead to other complications, niggles, because you're tired. That means you end up taking longer out of training. So to miss a session is just sometimes 100%, but most of the time it's 100% the right thing to do. Like pushing through is just, it could just jeopardize the weeks of training to come.
I think that's so great to hear, because when you are following, say, a marathon training program, you want to stick to it. There's a reason that you have a program, but I personally do switch around my sessions from time to time. If I am particularly tired, which at the moment happens quite a lot, I might switch around a tempo session and an easy run so that I have my easy run day. On the plus side, I do often find that exercising actually alleviates a lot of symptoms. So long as it's light, nothing crazy. And actually that really helps me.
I think I always would encourage my clients, if they can, to get out and move a bit, even if it's just going for a walk in some fresh air. I think sometimes if you do experience symptoms, unless they're really, really debilitating, you can't barely move, I think getting out and trying to move a little bit, even if it's for short duration, can be good.
If someone's feeling a little bit under the weather, would you recommend that they train? And if so, how hard? And when do you think people should take a day off?
So for me, like, I don't have scheduled rest days because I prefer to take them when I feel like my body needs them, or if I have something like coming down to London for a day and I know it's going to be crazy, I'd rather time it with that. But that doesn't mean that that's the way everyone should do it. If you need to factor in a rest day because mentally you need it every week, then have that same day that you take and enjoy it, embrace it. With getting ill, it kind of goes back to also what we were just kind of saying with like the menstrual cycle. You really need to listen to your body. I think a lot of people do then worry about missing training, about being further behind than they would like. But if you push through and you don't take the rest when your body needs it, you could just ruin the weeks ahead. And you also want to nip that illness in the bud. So the quicker you rest and recover, it's the same with an injury. Like, the quicker you just do nothing for a while, the more likely it is to get better in a shorter period of time, and then you can get back to it. Whereas if you keep pushing through, you could drag out an illness for weeks.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive, you know, you really want to stick to training for as long as you can until you can't do it anymore, but actually that's when you start to get things, you know, from a cold to a chest infection, for example, which is a lot more serious and will put you out for a lot longer.
Yeah, and your whole system's just run down when you're ill. So it will affect then how you move, and if you've got a slight niggle somewhere and then you keep pushing through it when you're ill, that could be the thing that tips you over the edge and turns that niggle into a full-blown injury. So you've got to be careful.
So speaking of taking rest, you've been very open in the past about your experience with REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. Could you explain to the viewer what that is and what your experience was with that?
Yeah, so I have had REDS. I don't have it now. I am recovered now, and I have been for about 18 months. But I pretty much had that. We don't actually really know because I was on the contraceptive pill for so long. So with that, you get an artificial, let's call it, period every month, and your hormones are dictated by the pill that I was taking. So we had no idea of if I had a cycle, what my natural hormone levels were, and I was just kind of riding in this wave of denial, I guess, that anything was wrong. I was kind of 4 or 5 kilos lighter than I am now. My feeling was poorer. I didn't have the education on it, I guess. It wasn't until the last couple of years where it's more spoken about that then I was like, oh, that could be what I have. And I've spoken to psychologists, and I have made gradual changes, especially in the last kind of 5 years, in my eating, in a little bit of weight gain. But the thing with your menstrual cycle is it can take so long to come back, depending on how long you've not had your period for, and depending on how long that weight gain takes, and alongside what activity you're doing. So if you're just doing too much and not eating enough, then you're going to have an energy deficiency. And in females, that often shows, not all the time, by a lack of period. Males, it's obviously harder to detect because they don't have that menstrual cycle every month. So once, a couple of years ago, I kind of made that decision to come off the pill to really start to see where my body was at. It was very clear that my period wasn't going to come back without even more significant changes. And although the injuries have been not great, and I would love to run loads of marathons the last couple of years, but they did then force me to slow down, to keep eating, doing less, and then eventually my cycle came back.
Okay.
Now, that probably makes it sound easier than it was. I had lots of support with psychology, check-ins with nutritionists where I'd have to write a food diary, basically. I did it online on an app. She would check that what I was eating, if it was enough, based on what activity I was doing. So I had that feedback of where I needed to make changes in my diet. And it was just simple, like, eat more carbs.
We love that. I personally eat a lot of carbs.
It's just eat more carbs. And now I feel like I'm at the point where I'm like quite obsessed about making sure that I eat enough, and I now know my own body. I know what weight I should be in order to have a regular menstrual cycle, and then it's just about keeping on top of that and checking in with yourself.
I think it's also important to note that REDS is not always on purpose. You know, people don't restrict their food necessarily, but then when they start doing training and they're
100%.
increasing their activity level, but not necessarily increasing their food intake commensurate to that, they can actually end up over the space of a year, for example, ending up in a calorie deficit and developing this issue. If someone thinks that they might be suffering from this, what are the symptoms that they would look out for, whether they're a man or a woman, and how can they get help for that?
Yeah, so with females it is like either significant delays in your cycle or just no cycle at all. Rapid like weight loss, if your body you are reducing too much weight. But then you'll also start to pick up things like potentially a lot of niggles. So if you feel that you're just feeling niggly all the time, or you've had a period of lots of injuries, then that's also kind of a red flag. And as well as just kind of general fatigue, if you're so tired all the time, and training is more becoming like a bit of a drag rather than something you look forward to, then it's very likely it's because you're just underfueling and that balance isn't there. And I think it's then when you're going into like recovery of it, it's to kind of respect that the process is not going to change quickly overnight, and depending how far into it you are, it will take longer.
Yeah, okay. I think people, especially women, don't necessarily realise how much you have to eat as an athlete. If you're training a lot, you can put away a lot of food, and you can and you should, especially carbohydrates, as you say.
Are so important.
Yeah, exactly.
Another sign is changes in bone density, which are obviously harder to detect yourself.
Yeah.
But if you start to like get osteopenia or osteoporosis, then that is due to underfueling often, unless it's a genetic thing within your family. And that's something you really don't want to go down that route. And luckily, like, that wasn't one of my symptoms. I was very fortunate that my bones managed to stay quite strong during this, but I have seen improvements in my bone health since eating better.
Amazing. So let's go back to the Olympics. The Paris Olympics, which I know sadly you can't go to, but you may have heard that it's the first one in history to have achieved gender parity. Has the lack of funding or support for women's sports in general, but specifically running as well, been something that you've noticed or has been frustrating to you?
I haven't noticed it personally too much in my career, but I don't know whether that's because I've come into it a little bit later. And by the time I actually got full sponsorship, and I've never been on a programme to get funding. I've had a lot of support from Scottish Athletics, but I've never had money from the governing bodies. So I have never personally felt like I've been at a disadvantage, but obviously you see it with a lot of sports. So it is amazing that Paris has made that change. But for me, personally, it's not really affected my journey, and I work with so many, like most of my team are male. And they've all been great, so supportive. I don't feel like they treat me differently and to the male athletes that they coach. And I feel now, because things like Red S and gender equality are more spoken about, I can talk to them also about those kind of things. It's not an awkward conversation to have.
I think that's so important.
Which is like the first step in all of it, really, like to not make it this
big deal.
Big thing,
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so some more questions from my followers. What is your favourite race nutrition?
So during a marathon, I will use Science and Sport isotonic gels. I usually just pick my favourite flavours to kind of make it a bit more exciting. Obviously, gels are not like everyone's favourite thing to eat. But I find Science and Sport really works for me, and because it works, I've just never experimented with other brands. Just stick to what you know.
Do you have any pre or post run rituals or stretches?
No, not really. I've not really found like something that I feel like I need to do before every run. I stretch on a daily basis quite a lot anyway, so maybe that is like a bit of a thing that I need to do to feel ready to race. But yeah, my husband and I, we're always doing kind of stretching the TV when we're watching TV before we go to bed at night. And yeah, I think that's definitely just another habit we've got into.
Pre and post run fuel, what's your fave?
So pre-run fuel is always porridge, and I'd even do that before I do like an evening session. Really? So even at work, like just a smaller portion, just in between like lunch and then going to the session, because I often know that I wouldn't be having dinner till a bit later. So I'd usually just make it porridge in a mug, and when I worked in finance, people would always be like, "What are you making? It's 4 p.m." I'm like, just leave me alone, I'm eating my porridge.
Let me eat my porridge in peace.
Enjoy it, okay? And then post-run, I guess it depends, like, if it's after a long run, which I usually do in the morning, I just love going for like a big brunch somewhere, so I'm having like the usual like eggs, avo, and toast. If I'm at a race, we'd probably always go for a pizza. Pizza, I love a
Nice.
pizza, yeah.
Classic, yeah. Do you listen to anything on your runs?
Generally, no. So for my sessions, where like more intense sessions, I usually have company, whether it's my coach on the bike or with another athlete. So I always find that kind of provides a bit of a distraction anyway. Fortunately, actually, for a lot of my easy runs, I can rope in company as well, so then that's quite nice just to like chat to someone. If I am going out on a long run by myself, I will take music. I like something that's a bit more uplifting.
So no audiobooks or podcasts?
No.
Oh, you're missing out.
I know, I feel like I'm missing out on a good time that I
Yeah.
can educate myself, but I need something that's like lively.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. If you could run anywhere in the world, where would it be?
So I often get asked this question if I would do like races like New York Marathon. At the moment, because I'm still chasing a time, I'm just trying to target those kind of fast, flat marathons. So I don't feel like a place is like at the front of my mind of where I'd like to run. I would, in saying that, like love to tick off all the majors at some point and do like Chicago, Boston, New York, Tokyo. That's all the ones I need to do.
Nice. Have you done Amsterdam?
No, I haven't, but I've heard that's like flat
and fast.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, so I hear. But for fun, where would you run? Somewhere beautiful.
So I love running in Mallorca. We go there quite a lot for training, and it's got a good mix of like running along the seafront. I just love being by the sea. Or you can kind of head onto the trails and up into kind of like the nice hills and mountains up there, which is really nice.
Would you ever consider doing trail running?
I think it would be one of those things that I would like to do, but after my marathon stuff. I actually have said since I moved to Leeds, which was only a year ago, and I have been injured, but I want to do more of my easy running on the trails because I think it's just a nice way to kind of offload a little bit from the road.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful, yeah.
I do my easy runs on the trails.
Yeah.
Actually, all of my runs are now easy runs, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it uses your muscle slightly differently as well.
Exactly.
So it strengthens you in a different way.
And I think that would be good for me, especially like with injuries like the shin thing, because when you run on the road, you are just travelling in that straight direction. If you can strengthen multi-directional, it's really good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, some quick fire questions. Go-to running shoes.
Adidas Pro 3.
Favourite time of day to run?
Morning.
Hummus or guacamole?
Oh, I probably eat more hummus, but if I had to choose one for the rest of my life, guac.
Ooh. Yeah. If you weren't a runner, what would you be?
I think, well, hopefully it's something running related. I think I would focus more on my running coaching, but do some more in-person stuff, because a lot of the stuff I do just now is online, and I think I would love to do more in-person stuff, especially with younger athletes, to kind of help them and safely progress through running and maybe not make some of the mistakes that I have made.
Name one thing that makes you happy every single day.
Eating my bowl of porridge.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. And thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, please do hit the thumbs up button and don't forget to click subscribe. I will be back with you next week with more running content. And if you could all write thank you to Steph for joining us,
That's
that would
been
be
great.
amazing. Thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.